Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's session. My name is Jenny, and I'll be facilitating today's event, and I'm joined by April, who will be presenting today. And just before we get started, we ask that you keep your cameras and your microphones off. The event will be recorded, so there will be an opportunity to refer back to the presentation and the recording when they are made available on the REC portal. And there'll be opportunities for a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions at any point, just type it into Slido. The QR code and the joining code is on the screen now. So I'll just wait for people to join that. I will also pop a link in the chat slightly later on. And just in the meantime, while people are typing their names into Slido, I will share the agenda with you today. So as you can see, we have quite a bit to cover in an hour, so I will hand over to April now.
Thanks, Jenny. Hi, good morning, everybody. So my name is April Harbour and I work within the REC Technical Services Code Manager. And thank you all for joining our first event on ERIN. So as we saw from the agenda, we're going to cover several areas this morning. We're going to look at what ERIN is, what it can be used for, and how it can be accessed within the REC portal. We're also going to take a look at some of ERIN's current features and functionality, discuss a little around its limitations, and then towards the end, I'd really like to open the session up for a bit more of a discussion, and that can be around your organisation's experiences with ERIN, and perhaps a bit more around if you have any expectations of an AI-powered tool that would support your experiences with interacting with the REC and ERIN in future. But we're going to start off at the basics. So what is ERIN? So ERIN stands for Energy Resource Information Network. It was introduced to support users of the REC to explore and query elements in an efficient and accurate manner. So ERIN is the REC's first AI-powered tool. However, it's not self-built. It's underpinned by a natural language processing tool that is ChatGPT. So I'm sure most of you will have heard of ChatGPT, but what exactly is it? Essentially, it's an application that allows users to interface with a generative pre-trained natural language model that powers generative artificial intelligence. So whilst the ChatGPT you can access online has the wealth of the World Wide Web at its disposal, ERIN is a much more linear version of it, as it has been prompt engineered to only answer questions specifically regarding the retail energy code. So we first implemented ERIN back in October 2023, and at the time it was contained within the REC Digital Navigator platform and was working on the ChatGPT version 3.5. Then we skip ahead a year and a bit into September 24, where several UX changes were implemented, and ERIN was made available on all REC portal pages and through the homepage as you now see it. And then skipping forward to most recently of February of this year, this is when we upgraded the ChatGPT version to 4.0. So as you can imagine, between October 23 and February 25, there's been some significant advances in the technology. We wanted to make sure users of ERIN were experiencing the upgraded features, such as faster and more accurate responses. So we can skip to the next slide, please, Jenny. So I mentioned previously, ERIN was designed to support users of the REC, but namely, we held four main use cases around how it could do just that. So I'll have a quick look over these. First up was supporting parties with their compliance requirements. And what we mean by this is simply that different market participants may have different obligations under the REC. And when queried, ERIN can respond to obligations regarding specific market participant roles. It was also to enable parties to keep up to date about any changes to the REC, providing operational support in that ERIN can provide responses regarding procedures, like customer switching or performance assurance as an example. And then lastly, it was around optimizing efficiency for REC document navigation. So obviously there's a huge wealth of REC documentation available on the portal, and you can use ERIN to find specific documents, sections or clauses within those documents. So just as a little disclaimer, whilst you can use ERIN to support your operational activities, ERIN is not the be and end all in fulfilling your REC obligations and should always be used in conjunction with the REC legal text and never as a replacement. So we're going to discuss a little bit later around how through the responses ERIN provides, you can attain source documentation and that can direct you to gain further information around a specific query that you may be asking. So if we can slip over to the next one, thank you. So I mentioned that the Ask ERIN feature is now available on all pages of the REC portal. So you can find that in the top right-hand corner wherever you are. And additionally, you can also, in some cases, use the search function where ERIN has been inbuilt. So if you ask a question, as well as the usual search function response that you would get through the search bar, you'd also receive a response from ERIN. However, this is only available on certain pages of the REC portal. So for example, if you were on any of the digital REC pages or any of the REC data specification pages and use the search function, as part of the response that you attain from there, you would also get a response through ERIN. And we can go to the next slide, please. So once you've selected the specific Ask ERIN feature, then you'll see the following dashboard, and that will be available to you to enter your query. So the little box at the bottom, it's quite literally as simple as write your query, press enter, and the whole process starts. One thing to note is that there are limitation or character limitations. So your query, your question must be between 10 and 250 characters. If it's any less than 10, then you'll see this little pop out saying that it's a bit on the short side and you'll be asked to provide further text to fulfill before it will provide a response. We can go to the next slide, please. So now we're just going to look at a few of the features that are built into ERIN. And firstly, as I mentioned, there's a list of REC documents that are included within ERIN. So it draws from over 100 REC documents, including all of the REC schedules, the REC data specification, all Category 3 documents and guidance documents, as well as more. So as ERIN has been specifically designed to provide responses to REC queries only, it's been engineered to only provide responses based on the context and content of these documents. So just for some further context around that, as we mentioned previously, ERIN is working through a natural language processing tool, and without these restrictions, it would be using sources from the web. As a result, it would be highly likely that it would provide hallucinated responses. So for those of you who may not know, a hallucinated response is where the model would output false information, but does it in a way that it's extremely convincing and does appear to be true. So these restrictions mean that the contents and the context of the response provided by ERIN is restricted to those documents included within its ingestion list. We can move to the next slide, please, Jenny. Thank you. Okay, so next up from the dashboard again, you have a link that you can select to see some tips and some examples. And there are a few do's and don'ts to enable you to frame your question to receive the best possible response. So some of these do's being that you ensure to use REC-specific terminology. So this is a really important point as ERIN will work off the latest terminology. So if you're used to using what I would classify as outdated, but still very much used in the industry, terminology that may not be specific to what's contained within the REC legal text, then you might find that the responses that you get and the source documentation that you provided aren't quite what you're looking for. So if you're aware of the predetermined REC language and terminology, then please try to use those in those cases. And also trying to be as specific as possible around the query you're asking for. So it's not huge on the screen, but I'll talk through the example that it's showing towards the right-hand side. So the initial question is asking about how decisions can be appealed. The response that ERIN provides will be quite open-ended, as the term decision can be used in multiple different contexts. So if that question was then reframed to be a bit more specific, so in this case it's saying regarding appealing a self-governance change, then the way that ERIN responds can be a lot more specific and detailed. We can move to the next slide, please. So just some small other points on features is that as soon as you've entered a question, that question will be logged and it will be available on the chat history section on the left-hand side. If you select an entry from the chat history, again, just by selecting it, it will automatically rerun that question through ERIN. And one point to note is that the chat history is specific to the browser session you're within. So if you're logged in and you log off, or you navigate away and the session times out, then you will lose that chat history. So one of the do's that we have on the tips list is to make sure that if you are looking for a specific response, that you can clipboard that message through the little function that's available on the right hand side of where the response is provided. And additionally, once ERIN has provided a response, you will find a feedback section where you can provide a thumbs up or a thumbs down. If you choose a thumbs down, you'll be asked to provide further feedback, which is just a free text field. And just to mention that feedback is really helpful for us as a code manager to make sure we're providing the best experience of those interacting with ERIN and can support our improvement activities. And I mentioned it on the very first slide that the code manager does maintain logs of all interactions held with ERIN to support those improvement activities. But I would say that no personal information is ever included. So that's regarding users or sessions. It is quite literally the interactions and the questions that are being asked through ERIN that are being logged. So you can use it as a guest or if you are a logged in user of the portal. But if you're ever worried about providing feedback, it's never drawn back against those user levels. We just simply use it to support improvements and performance aspects. If we can move to the next slide, thank you. So we've seen ERIN responds based on the documentation that it has ingested, but as well as providing a response, it will also cite the rec source documents that have been used to create the response. So this is a really helpful mechanism to ensure that you have the full picture and you can be confident in your interpretations and your understanding. So from a functional perspective, under all the responses, you have a sources section, and you can use the plus item to expand them. You'll be provided links within that to the relevant rec documentation, so you can either download that in full, or you can select on the source snippets option, which then will provide the list, as we can see on the slide here, of all the specific rec documentation sections ERIN has found and used to generate the response. So if you select on a source snippet and it's the document that it's referencing is a digital rec document, then a new browser window will open and you'll be directed to the relevant clause. Well, you'll be directed to that document, and if there is a specific clause or section that it is referencing, you'll be automatically navigated to that section and it will be highlighted so that you've got easy visibility. If any of the source documentation provided does not have a digital rec function, then the source documentation will still be provided and you'll be able to download that. So for example, if it's related to a market message that is contained within the rec data specification, it will open up the specific market message that you're looking for, that you've asked about, as opposed to the whole catalogue that you'd have to search through. So it's being very specific about the responses and the information that it's providing back to you. And if we can move to the next slide. Thank you. So we're really winging through this morning. So we've spoken a lot around what ERIN can do, but I guess the question is there anything it can't do? And the answer to that is yes, simply. ERIN does have limitations, and this is where we've implemented certain restrictions through prompt engineering to ensure things like that no contact details are ever provided as a result of a response. So there are certain cases where contact details are publicly available on the rec portal. If that is the case, then ERIN will provide a sort of a pre-generated response that will confirm links to the relevant areas where you can find that public contact information. So this might be things like rec service provider email addresses and so on, or it will additionally drive you towards the rec service desk. So if this information that you're after isn't publicly available, you will be able then to use the rec service desk to gain that further information, and that can be done via web chat or through raising a ticket. Additionally, to note that ERIN will never respond to questions which are not based on the rec. So this is a general theme that we've implemented to ensure that the content of the responses are only ever rec-based, but also to ensure that the hallucinations that we sort of referred to earlier can be better managed. And this also leads back to making sure that rec terminology is used, because whilst your question may be entirely related to the rec, if it is not specific on rec terminology, it may not be identified within the context of the rec documentation that ERIN can provide a response on. And likewise, we've just said that it won't provide responses based on the remit of its ingested documents. And I think this is why it's so important to make sure that you review those source documentations so that you're always aware what questions can be asked of it, and to essentially manage expectations about the types of responses that you could receive. And I think worth noting here as well that every time we have a new rec release window and new codes or code drafting or any changes to the rec data specification or category documents are implemented, then these are always the latest versions that are ingested within ERIN. So whilst that also always means that you're going to get the latest information, what it does mean is that if you are asking queries that are related to documents which are no longer the latest or the live version, then you're unlikely to get the best response, unless obviously it's something that's carried through. And then just one thing to point out regarding dates. So queries relating to dates and times, we've also found ERIN does struggle to provide responses to those questions. So if the date that you are referencing is contained within the actual legal text or the text of the document, then ERIN will be able to respond. So as an example here, if you were to ask, when was version 3.4 of rec schedule 14 implemented, then that would be included within the iterations table and the release table, so it would be able to answer on that. But if it's not captured in the text, then it has no basis to read anything else from. So, for example, if you were looking to find a date that the document was perhaps uploaded to the portal, ERIN wouldn't be able to respond effectively on that because it's not within the basis of its source content. And then finally, ERIN does not have a conversation history function. So this is a little bit different to the chat history function we saw earlier. And essentially what this means is that you can't carry out a conversation with ERIN over multiple messages. Each message is seen and responded to in a bespoke fashion. So again, for example, if you were to ask a question such as what information is contained within Schedule 30, so Schedule 30 is the resolution of consumer-facing switching and billing issues schedule, ERIN would provide a response. If you were to follow up that question with something like what obligations are in there for energy suppliers, then ERIN wouldn't realise that you're still asking the question about Schedule 30 and would provide a response simply based on that latest question. So I think that's just an important point to note. And then I think on the next slide, we've just got a couple of examples of some of these predefined responses that have been built in. So we spoke about the contact detail ones. So you can see that as the top example. It will provide you a link to the service desk and also provides the email, which will open up in Outlook format if that's one of the functions that your system uses. And from the service desk page, that's where you can attain other contact details such as the rec service provider email addresses. The bottom example is the one that will generally be used. So this would be whether ERIN has reviewed the rec and the contents documents. It can't find the answer to the question. So either that means that it's not based upon the rec, or the question that's been asked of it has too many permutations or not enough permutations for it to be able to provide a response that it is confident within. And again, here it provides a link to that tips section we spoke about earlier, and again, a link to the service desk. We can move to the next slide. Great. So as we say, ERIN was introduced in October 2023, and since then the code manager has been analysing users' interactions with it. So as the end of March of this year, there were over 8,000 individual queries that had been asked. This averaged roughly to about 450 per month. We do tend to see peaks and troughs, namely seeing those peaks when a new rec release has been implemented. As we might expect, that's ERIN's a much easier mechanism to find out the latest information. And then from a feedback perspective, obviously we spoke about the function where if you provide a thumbs down, that you have the ability to provide a free text comment to help supplement the reason for the thumbs down response. But we have found that where we do have these thumbs down responses, we rarely see any comments provided as a result, and it's just a straight thumbs down. So ultimately, whilst we can kind of gather that the answer to the question of has this response been helpful is probably no, any further information as to why perhaps that response was not as helpful as it could have been is not really defined. And then generally with regards to the kind of the categorizations of how people are interacting with ERIN, the types of questions, they tend to fall into sort of 5 main parties. So there's always a where can I find, and that could be a rec document, a clause, or a data specification message. There is the what does, and that can be what does a term mean, or what does a specific data item or market message do. There's the general as a party, how can I do anything, and as a party, when should I, and then the who should I contact. So what this has done and through this analysis is it has provided us with the assurance that the original use cases set out for ERIN do meet users' needs. But there's always, of course, more that can be done. And this is where we really value the feedback from you as our users to help give us as much as we can take on board. To be honest, I think this is now the last of my kind of predefined slides that are taking you through ERIN's functions and capabilities and some of its limitations. And what I would really like to do is now, sort of before we go into any kind of formalised Q&A, if we can go to the next slide, Jenny, please. Thank you. Is just have a bit more of an open forum discussion. Obviously, if you're comfortable taking yourself off mute, I think you will have the capability to do so in this session. But I guess to just drive some thinking, so whether you are a regular user or you've never used ERIN before, like we say, gaining feedback is the best way that we can ensure that we're providing that best user experience. So just thinking about a few items, what has your experience interacting with ERIN been like? If anyone's comfortable coming off mute or would like to provide anything on that, or happily take it in the chat. Does anyone have any specific comments? And these can be both positive and negative. We're quite open for any and all feedback. I think we've got Charlotte.
Hi, thank
Hello.
you. My name's Charlotte. I'm from BUK. We're an IGT and an IDNO. I've used ERIN a few times. I've found it really useful for searching terminology, that kind of thing. And I think for me, the limitations are where I'm looking for help, a quick way to find operational contacts for different businesses, and I know how to find them through the through the spreadsheets and the longer way around. But I guess I would personally find it really useful if I could just say, hey, who's the contract manager for this person? But I appreciate that goes beyond the boundary of what's publicly available without having to sign in to the rec. I guess that's where the problem lies, but that would be really useful for me.
Okay, no, that's really helpful. Thank you, Charlotte. Anyone else like to
Yeah, sorry, it's Elaine Carr here from Scottish
Hi,
Power
Elaine.
Energy Networks.
Thank
I've
you.
only used ERIN a couple of times and I found it really useful when I'm looking up to find where I suppose obligations are and looking to maybe get a bit more detail in some of them to share. So yeah, it's kind of gave me the options that I've been able to find what I'm looking for in terms of that. I suppose the previous point that was raised is a pretty valid one around, being able to find contact details. Yeah, and what would, yeah, maybe be useful in terms of that contact detail. So, but when we're looking to raise STEP queries, and it's maybe more of an STEP issue than it is a contact issue, we generally deal mentally in MPIDs. And when you go into STEP, it's the supplier name. So every time we're raising an STEP, if it's a supplier that's maybe less common or maybe has smaller MPAN numbers, we always have to go and do the lookup to see who they are to find the supplier name to make sure we can send the STEP. It would probably be quite useful if there was a general lookup without going into contact details as to MPID and supplier name.
No, I think that's a really interesting point, Elaine, actually. But I do agree. Does that go into the bounds of the STEP process as opposed to having the functions within ERIN due to the constraints of providing the information that may not be publicly available? But yeah, no, it's definitely a good point to note, and thank you for raising that.
Sorry, I was just going to mention we've already had a comment on Slido from Shane mentioning, as an OAM, I find ERIN useful. Even if it can't always provide me the exact answer, it always steers me in the right direction.
Great, thank you. Jenny, if you could keep me abreast on any of those Slido comments, I can't see it from the
Sure, no problem.
that I've got, but no, that's brilliant. And I guess then taking sort of the next step of parties and people that have been able to interact directly with ERIN. Are there any thoughts, whether you have experience with AI powered tools outside of ERIN itself, that you have particular expectations? Would you think it would be useful to have further functionality available through it? So this could be things like the ability to manage speech or images of so on. So manage it less than a text-based option and have different features in that sense. Does anyone have any strong feelings or views on that? Hi, Jamie, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Hello there. It's Jamie Burrows from OVO Energy. I was just in my thought process in regards to the AI was, if you're doing any trend analysis on the inquiries, if you see repeated fielded questions for a specific subject matter, would you then trend off of that and release publication on the REC portal?
Yeah, so that's exactly kind of how we're using I suppose the analysis of the interactions directly with it. So if we find that there is people specifically looking for, I don't know, a particular technical guidance document or something or so on of that, then we use that data to drive more REC bulletin interaction, I would say, and we can then discuss with our other code manager teams around, would it be easier to, instead of embedding some of these documents within some of the subsections of the portal, should we actually draw those out and make them available from the homepage? So as a user, you'd be able to kind of pick things up straight away. Does that answer your question? You're thinking?
Yeah, that's perfect. It's just it has answered the question. It almost forms it into a FAQ page, so that'd be perfect.
Okay, no, that's really useful. Thank you. Elaine, did you have your hand up? It's gone back down now, so no problem if you didn't. And then I think we've covered this in general with the other areas, but are there any features or anything that would make you or your organisation more likely to interact with ERIN? Obviously, we do, like we say, see a lot of interaction around rec release timeframes, rec release window, sorry. But is there anything that would drive you or your organisation to go to ERIN directly? We could take any feedback on. Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you all for providing that feedback you have. That's been really, really useful, and we can take that back internally for further discussions. I think, Jenny, the next one is around the Q&A, but I appreciate people may have already had their questions answered, but I'm more than happy to stay on if anything comes up as a result of slideshow. We'll cover those up.
Definitely. We don't have any questions as of yet, but if anything does come to mind, we'll leave that open for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, no, that's